Good afternoon to all of you who are online, and I'm happy to see so many of you that are participating with us. I'm Karen Yarbrough, and I'm your host for this presentation. The month of January has been designated Human Trafficking Prevention Month by President Joe Biden. So today I thank you for joining us to examine, contrast, and understand the age-old problem of human trafficking. Our presentation framework will be, number one, an unimaginable crime. 2, meet the Hottentot Venus. 4, not a victimless crime. 5, the Hottentot attitude today. 6, meet a survivor. And finally, our final thoughts and what can we do? Take a look at these words on this screen. Many of these words suggest that human trafficking is a multifaceted crime laced with people, children, men and women, and those who subjugate them. They also include words of hope like awareness, protection, and prevention. Slavery remains one of the worst injustices on our planet. With it comes violence, abuse, and fear. Although prostitution is considered the oldest profession, it really should be called the oldest oppression. Sadly, it's the second most profitable illegal activity, only behind drug trafficking. So let's take a look at who the real criminals are behind the scenes. According to characteristics of human trafficking defendants in cases charged in U.S. District Court in fiscal year 2020, 92% were male, 63% were white, 18% were Black, 17% were Hispanic, but 95% were U.S. citizens. 66% had no prior convictions. So let's look at a beginning. Saartjie Sarah Baartman was one of the first Black women known to be subjected to human sex trafficking. She was mockingly named the Hottentot Venus by Europeans, as her body was publicly examined and exposed inhumanely throughout the duration of her young life. Moreover, her experience reinforced the already existing and highly negative sexual preoccupation with African women's bodies by Europeans. Born in 1789, Sarah Baartman was born to a Khoikhoi family in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. Unfortunately, her mother died when she was an infant, and her father was later killed by Bushmen while driving cattle. Sarah spent her childhood and teenage years on Dutch European farms. She was sold into slavery to a trader named Peter Willem Cesar, who took her to Cape Town, where she became a domestic slave to his brother, Hendrik. In 1810, although she could neither read nor write, the 21-year-old Baartman supposedly signed a contract with William Dunlap, a physician who was a friend of the Cesar brothers. This contract required her to travel with the brothers and exhibit her body for entertainment purposes. According to the contract, she was to receive a portion of the earnings from her exhibitions and would be allowed to return to her home in South Africa after 5 years. However, the contract was false in all details, and her enslavement continued for the rest of her life. She was first exhibited in London in the Egyptian Hall at the Piccadilly Circus on November 24th, 1810. Her public treatment, however, quickly drew the attention of British abolitionists who charged Dunlop and the Cesars with holding her against her will. Unfortunately, the court ruled against her after reviewing the contract that she signed. And let me remind you that she could neither read nor write. In September 1814, after staying 4 years in Great Britain, she was taken to France and sold to S. Roux, an exhibitor who showcased animals. He put her on public display in and around Paris, often at the Palais Royal. He also allowed her to be sexually abused by patrons willing to pay for her defilement. Roux garnered considerable profits due to the public's preoccupation with her body. Sarah Sarchi Bartman died in Paris on December 29, 1815, at the young age of 26. Even after her death, many of her body parts would be on display at the Museum of Man in Paris to support racist theories about Africans. Some of her body parts remain on display until 1974. In 1994, South African President Nelson Mandela requested that Bartman's remains be returned to her home state of South Africa. On March 6, 2002, her remains were returned and buried at Hankey in the Eastern Cape province. So let's discuss the Hottentot attitude today. It represents a point where our culture began to tolerate public exploitation. And today's culture still does that. You can see from these two videos that, and I'm sure some of you have seen these type videos, because we know that sex sells, and that's today what we use it for. Sex sales is projected in the media daily. And quite frankly, if we accept that, we are in effect selling our own children. Even as recently as 2022, you heard me, 2022, Balenciaga are under fire for selling sex and using children in inappropriate displays. These attitudes turn oppressed and exploited sex workers into criminals, rather than what they really are, and that is victims of abuse who are misused and discarded. This mistreatment ignores their humanity and right to live free without exploitation. So the question is, where does slavery hide? Now, slavery is a crime, like any other crime, quite frankly, but it's hidden. And if you look at some of these pictures, it kind of gives you an idea. It grows from injustices like poverty, abuse, neglect, and lack of resources. I don't know any young girl who says that when she grows up, she wants to be a prostitute. Moving to address the age-old problem of extreme poverty would help subside the desperation that leads people to make bad decisions. And there's a really clear nexus between poverty and crime. And for us, we must shine a light where they hide in our stereotypes and paternalistic attitudes. Now, certainly, there are lots of laws on the books, and prostitutes are victims of coercive crimes and should not be treated as criminals. Illinois law holds that pimps and handlers accountable for their actions. And certainly this law is helping to change some attitudes. The question still remains, is the law working? Recent reports that I have viewed suggest that there is need for more awareness and more enforcement. So, I want to introduce you to an amazing survivor, Dr. Marian Hatcher. And here's just a short list of her many, many accomplishments and accolades. First of all, she has a Bachelor of Science degree from Loyola University with a concentration in finance. She has an honorary doctorate of divinity from CICA International University and Seminary. She's an ambassador at large and chaplaincy at CICA International University, an NGO in special consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. She very recently just retired from the Cook County Sheriff's Office, was a civilian in law enforcement, a U.S. representative of Space International, and she was awarded the 2016 Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award from President Barack Obama. She's featured as a national and international speaker. She's been on the Oprah Winfrey Network, Nick Kristoff's A Path Appears, The Trap from Liberty to Captivity, Shared Hope International Gang Trap Series, and many, many more. And now, Dr. Marian Hatcher, and let's thank her for her participation today. So, good afternoon, Marian, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking out the time to talk to me and our audience about this important topic. But before we get started, I would like you to briefly tell our audience a bit about your amazing self.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You know, I consider you my mentor, and I have always considered it such a blessing to be your friend and to be able to call you friend and to have you in my life as well as your family. Simply said, I have been in, excuse me, I've been a civilian in the Cook County Sheriff's Office until my recent retirement, November 30th of 2022. First as an inmate, and later on as a civilian employee for approximately 15 years, going from the jail-based treatment setting after domestic violence led me to a really dark place, which is in plain sight, you know, that cesspool that is exploitation due to vulnerabilities. My vulnerability at that time was the domestic violence. My story, of course, is not the norm because I did have a loving and caring family, of which you know my family, and but you know, there are experiences when we are younger that can have an impact on us later on in life that we don't realize will trigger certain types of behavior and certain types of surprising reduction. I guess I would call it a reduction of the ability to protect oneself because of something that happened in the past. I was molested by a cousin at the age of 7, and that completely perverted my sense of intimacy for down the road when the right set of circumstances occurred. And so when the domestic violence happened, and this is after, you know, my daddy went Mississippi on my cousin, and you know, oh yeah, it was not pretty when it was caught. So it was not like it wasn't addressed. But if you don't address what happened to the person who has been victimized and not realize that you need to immediately have a therapeutic intervention down the road, it was amazing once I really thought on it with, therapeutic intervention many years later, that opened me up for a lack of understanding on how precious our bodies are, and that it's not okay for a person to buy you, for a person to exploit you. And so when the right set of circumstances and vulnerabilities emotionally, many years later, were there with domestic violence and the abuse, and then you introduce drugs into that, not realizing I had addictive personality, combine all of that with a great deal of guilt and loss, with losing all that I had gained in terms of education, employment, career. Find yourself on the streets of Chicago, missing for 2 years, losing custody of your youngest child, not knowing if your mom lived through a surgery that she was having the day after I went gone again. The crack told me to leave, I left. And so you have all these things that one day snowball, and literally could be, I can trace it back to the ability to just not care about myself, because one day somebody put their hands on me in an inappropriate way, and all of a sudden, after the right set of other circumstances, mental health situations, and many years of depression. My mother suffered from multiple personality disorder. There's all these different things that one trigger, that all of a sudden you find yourself on the streets of Chicago. You find yourself in Cook County Department of Corrections. You find yourself facing 3 to 7 years in penitentiary. You find yourself with the blessing of 120 days in a jail-based treatment setting at the formerly Department of Women's Justice Services, at the Sheriff's Office. And then you find yourself one day having instead of 3 to 7 years in penitentiary, in lieu of 3 to 7 years in the penitentiary. And and then, your family knew me, and nobody could believe that I had went off into La La Land like that, because I was always what I used to call an overachiever. God, really, the Holy Spirit told me one day, no, there was just, you had an abundance of grace that was outpoured on your life so that you could do what God wanted you to do later on. And so finding out finding myself years later, not going to the penitentiary, but having the probation opportunity and the jail-based treatment opportunity, that turned into volunteering for the Cook County Sheriff's Office, Department of Women's Justice, becoming a contractual employee, and eventually a full-fledged Sheriff's Office employee. Had 5 or 6 titles, started as an inmate, ended up as a policy analyst and victim advocate for the, I don't know if they still have the Office of Public Policy, but at the time I was there before I went on disability, that's what I was. And, it's amazing because I went in with all of this brokenness, and over the years, had the opportunity to end up representing Sheriff Thomas J. Dart, local, state, national, and at the end, that last season there, last fall, internationally in Budapest, Hungary. And so it's truly a miracle, and only God can do it.
Sounds like a book to me, Marian. That's
Amen.
what it sounds like.
I know.
And I'm going to talk to you about that. So
Yes,
we actually met in Springfield, and you were there to testify. I reached out to the sheriff, and we needed somebody who could speak on this subject and really had an in-depth knowledge. The bill was a bill to hold Johns accountable. And could you just, you've kind of stepped, thrown it out already that you worked at the sheriff's office, but could you discuss the National John Suppression Initiative?
Well, yes, the National Gun Suppression Initiative is the largest organized sting operation to arrest sex buyers in the country or anywhere actually that's ever occurred. I had the privilege on behalf of the sheriff because once I started to recover, become this new creature, that old business self that had been squashed, kind of rolled into this new person with the recovery, but also now this opportunity to address the structural violence that had lent itself to what happened to me, but so much more to those who never had the opportunity to speak on behalf of the most vulnerable. And so the I had the opportunity to represent the sheriff along with my then boss, first boss, with my elevation to administrative and then executive assistant for Terry McDermott. We attended a demand abolition launch, which out of that came the sheriff's National John Suppression Initiative. And what that was we just started with 8 jurisdictions. 216 sex buyers were arrested in that first sting operation in the pilot in October 2011. And subsequently, by I coordinated stings 1 through 18 on behalf of the sheriff and his office. And we had, by the time I left, I think we had about 150, 160 agencies throughout the country. But Sting 19, I wasn't there, but I had left the roadmap because, I was the overachiever, quote unquote, as I used to say, and made sure, because, you have to do your job. I was a project expert. I was a project expert in corporate America before the disappearance and all that goes with that for corporate America, and same type of skill set left that roadmap. And so Sting 19 was actually executed. I think maybe 5 or 6 people executed that along with the folks around the country, and arrested the 10,000 plus sex buyer in the country. And so it's never been done, and I doubt it'll ever be done again.
So the emphasis was on the buyer versus
Correct.
the seller. If the demand is not there,
That's
then
right.
the whoever's being focused on here, they've got to figure something else out. And that's what I thought that was really telling about really Sheriff Dart. I've had a number of conversations with him about this whole issue of trafficking. And
Yes.
he told me, he said, listen, the problem is not the girls or the guys that are in prostitution. They're there for any number of reasons. It's the people who are the buyers.
Correct.
Yes. So tell me, since you began your work, how has technology impacted it? With the prevalence of social media apps and what have you, has this made it easier for these predators to reach or groom unknowing women or children?
Absolutely. The interesting part about it is I had the opportunity in pretty much, we would say, a decade of coordinating the sting operations. As I said, the pilot was October 2011. And over time, collecting data specifically on the types of operations that were run. If you look at maybe the midpoint, 4 years, 5 years, you would see maybe 60% street operations that were being run and 40% online, like Craigslist, Backpage back then. Backpage was the big monster in the room. I actually had the opportunity to testify against Backpage along with Sheriff Dart and our policy chief back then. And so by the time let's say the ninth year or so, maybe the eighth or ninth year, it flipped. It went from 60% street prostitution operations to 60% 60+% online operations. And so during that time period, one of the things that I was responsible for, including, making sure that there were victim-centered services for the women and LGBTQ community that were impacted by this exploitation. I was also responsible for finding the newest way to do what was being done. And that included what the bad guys were doing, what the bad actors were doing. And so you would see the use of technology increase in terms of the types of apps, going from utilizing Facebook, utilizing Twitter, utilizing all types of, your standards. But then you have, the Snapchat became a big deal and still is, in terms of how to not only recruit, but also how to place a person basically on the auction block to be bought. What we also did though was, we have to up our game as they up their game. And so I brought into the sheriff's office resources on many levels, most important of which in the later sting operations was artificial intelligence. And the artificial intelligence platforms allowed us the ability to have conversations with buyers, and they thought that we would post fake ads. And we were posting these fake ads anyway, and we were doing the sting operations with these fake ads all along. But those were very labor intensive and very expensive because there's not a lot of female investigators in policing, period. And then let's say, I'll give you an example, maybe 7 people are involved in a street sting operation. You'll have your supervisor, you'll have 3 decoy female investigators, maybe 3 different races, Asian, African-American, Caucasian, and then the rest of the team for the takedown and all that goes with that. That's a lot of resources. That's a lot of money, to take down maybe, if you're lucky, through a 7-day sting operation, let's say 30, maybe you get, even more, 60 or 70 buyers. If you're using artificial intelligence, you can exponentially waste buyer time. You can exponentially arrest more buyers. I'll go from, let's say, if we on the low end, if we're doing street stings for an operation, maybe 100 buyers. Well, if you're using artificial intelligence, you can actually touch 2,000 buyers. It is just that exponentially successful. And one of the best things that we can ever do is waste the buyer's time and not show up, or show up and arrest them.
Right. So technology on one hand has hurt the movement, but on the flip side, it has helped as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. I was so proud in 2017 when I watched you accept a Lifetime Achievement Award that was given to you from former President Barack Obama for your leadership in fighting sex trafficking, prostitution, and domestic violence. What was that like? That had to be surreal.
Well, it really was surreal. When the notification came, it was kind of like, nah, this is not real. I've experienced a lot of miraculous things during my tenure at the sheriff's office. Those, of course, only remind me of the responsibility that I have to remain humble and do God's work, because this is not the norm for a person that ends up, in the situation that I did. And just the first African-American president to be known, excuse me, for just putting one foot in front of the other, but to be acknowledged by President Barack Obama, absolutely life-changing, absolutely wonderful, just surreal, absolutely surreal.
Yeah, well, it certainly was, but I was so proud of you. I mean, you are our you live in Maywood, and I live in Maywood as well. You are my shero. And do you remember when the Players Ball was going to be um, at one of our local banquet facilities? And
Yes.
what happened there? Could you just for a moment, if you can recall what we did as a community?
Well, we both found out independently, and then obviously the first person I called was you. First person, I don't know who called who, but we were livid that they were intending on having this well-known back then. Thank God you don't hear about it. At least I don't hear about it. I haven't heard about it lately because it
Marian,
started getting a lot of negative attention.
for our audience, just what is the Players Ball? By the
Yeah.
way, they had one in December of 2022.
Did they? Okay.
Yes, they
Oh,
did.
Lord.
Okay.
Well, the Players Ball, unfortunately, what people think about when they think of a pimp has historically been what they would see a lot in Black exploitation movies. Yeah, and you know, pimps would look like a black man in with the fedora and the snakeskin shoes and the fur coat and all of that, and then all these, and I mean, these guys are actually pimps. Of course, they're really the pimps on the low rung of who was really making money doing these things, because as we have not only learned, but we made sure that people know that those that exploit look like everybody on the spectrum. White, black, female, I mean, you name it. If they're benefiting from the sale of a person's body, they are a pimp or a trafficker. And so with that experience, we just came together and we're like, not in our community. This is you guys, wherever you're going to have this, we're not sure what you're going to do, but you're not doing this in Maywood. And so we came together and we didn't just protest. We came together and developed we showed the truth. And how did we do that, Clerk Yarborough? How did we do that again? We had an event, right?
Yeah, we did. Before we went outside to have the protest,
Okay.
you and there were other of your colleagues who came together and actually
Right.
to our group, the group of people who were going to do the protesting, so that they would understand that this is not a victimless crime. And
Right.
these people who were, glorifying this whole process, they didn't even understand
Right.
that. So what you did was put a face to, hey, this happened to me. And it wasn't right. And so
we actually went inside.
We did. We went into the mayor's office. We went into the mayor's office, and we were in the public, where they have their meetings, and we had a whole crowd of people there.
Yeah.
But I think that was a turning point for people to understand what this really is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we ran them out of town. We ran them out. They couldn't come. They couldn't be here in our village, and I will always be so pleased and proud of our community for coming together. And it just shows what can be done. And obviously, I've seen a lot of that on a local level, but also I've seen it on the federal level with legislation that I've worked with many people to get passed. And so, yeah, it takes a community.
It does. It does. So, whether it's your lifetime achievement, the amazing work you do, what are you most proud of when you look at all the experiences that you've had?
Well, I'll be honest with you. When I would think that I'm most proud of something, then God would bless me with something else. It's hard to pinpoint one, so I'll give you a couple. One of the things that I was really proud of, other than obviously the Lifetime Achievement Award from President Obama, the next thing I would say was being honored on congressional record by our senator and our good friend, Senator Richard Durbin. That meant for Black History History Month. I was like, how that happened?
That's
Somebody facing 3 to 7 years in a penitentiary, all that stuff, and many, many other, this whole long list of stuff that had occurred. And then God had this new list of stuff that, in the on congressional record, comparing me to Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. It's like, are you serious?
yes.
And it was just surreal. And then somewhere in there, I lose track of what year was what, but also I received executive clemency and expungement from Governor Bruce Rauner, Republican governor, which I always thought was interesting, because I've done, as I've had the opportunity to have an impact on this issue, human trafficking, gender-based violence on a national and international level, I truly have had to, as you have, work on both sides of the aisle.
Yes.
And that has shown me, and you were a great deal of influence. I don't know if I've ever told you, but you were such a vision of what that truly meant to get work done in the state of Illinois and on the federal level. Just truly so important to be able to do that. Also, I would think just the ability to heal with my family, the disappointed parents, the angry children that I went home to after being missing for 2 years, and so many things that happened. I've seen people who did not have the opportunity to ever get what I got, and to have relationship with all of my children, with both my parents. Thank God I have still both my parents. My dad's 84. My mom will be 84 in April of this year. And now I have 4 grandchildren, 2 girls and 2 boys. And to be able to, and I mean, my granddaughter, she's my oldest granddaughter. When she was like 5 or 6, we would take her to events. She was there when Sheriff Dart and I both, there was a More Than a Survivor exhibit that was going around the country, and we had it at the museum at Loyola. I graduated from Loyola, and Sheriff Dart got his law degree at Loyola, and my granddaughter was there as we spoke on the issue of human trafficking. And it meant a lot to me to be able to be a vision of hope and a guiding light and star, hopefully, for them to know that not only can you go through hell and make your way back, but you can also impact many people that you will never ever meet, that you can love your family, you can heal with your family, but you can also have an impact on your community directly. And also, just by being the person that God intended for you to be, admit your faults, admit your failures, and try to just find where is it that he wants you to have an impact. And that they've seen me do that. My children and then my grandchildren have seen me work my way back with God's help, his grace and mercy. The last thing I would say is, while I've been on disability, before I formally retired, because I have multiple sclerosis, I first went on disability because I was getting both knees replaced, but then the MS went from relapse remitting stage to progressive, and my neurologist and I realized that I would not be able to return. So my last 3 years, I've been on medical leave. But during that time, God still used me. He used me from my bedroom. And I testified before. I was asked to provide, first of all, I was asked to provide, and this was pre-COVID, I was asked to provide technical assistance to the National Security Council, U.S. House Financial Services Committee. And I finally, after, I provided that technical assistance, then there was COVID, so we couldn't have, they asked me to testify before this subcommittee on human trafficking that's under the purview of Auntie Maxine Waters. So I was like, oh my God, you know, like starstruck, right? And actually, she posed one of the questions to me. I thought I was gonna lose my mind, Cordell, bro, because you know that's an icon, of course. And so, but after my testimony for that committee, I was contacted by the ranking member, Republican, as I said, you know, across the aisle. Um, Ranking member Patrick McHenry for, I believe it's North Carolina, had his office contacted me the day after I testified and asked me to work with them on a bill. Because during my trafficking experience, because I had worked, you know, and gotten my life in a really good shape and all that before, you know, went to the domestic violence sent me off on that spiral. And so I still had good credit. I had worked to A1 credit, you know, I was living in River Forest before I went, you know, lost my mind and all that. So during my trafficking experience, I was asked by my trafficker to buy a car for another trafficker. And of course I did it, you know, because that was the lifestyle. And of course you forget these things because you're in this drug induced, you know, crazy world. When you get your life back, all of a sudden you're trying to, you know, reestablish basics, bank account, you know, credit, all that. And you have this $20,000 debt.
Oh my.
That you can barely remember ever doing it. And so I had testified about it and it really touched his heart. So we wrote this bill together along with partners that I do a lot of policy work with, Shared Hope International and the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And we, now this is God for you. You already know as a legislator, you already know how hard it is to get legislation passed in one Congress or one session, right? So we wrote the bill, it passed. Well, I testified in March. The bill passed the House on suspension in June of that year. Now this is 2020. No, what the year? No, this is 2021. Sorry, 2021. Then it was introduced in the Senate by Senator Cornyn, and it was signed into legislation. You know, we did multiple changes and versions, but it was signed into law by President Biden December 27th of 2021.
Amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
what it does, yeah. But bipartisan, you know, legislation that some things are just, you know, we just need to do. It's not unlike when you pushed for the death penalty to be abolished in this state. Some things are just the thing to do. And this was one of those things. And so I would say that is definitely on the list because what that legislation did, and then we provided technical assistance and worked with the credit bureau, the agency that oversees the whole thing, all of the credit bureaus down to, you know, the municipal level, because the law itself, which is really cool, being able to be a part of writing the legislation, it initially was written for federal, state, and then we added tribal. But when we worked with the credit bureau agency that, you know, is for all the credit reporting agencies in the country, they really got it and they added municipal. So we brought it from federal to,
all the way down to municipality.
Very humbling. And so now there is this huge mechanism. If any trafficking survivor, victim of trafficking in a situation like mine, or even for medical debt that was a result of a person, you know, the trauma treatment that they might have needed, or, you know, I've dealt with women who've had traumatic brain injury, who've had all type. It's so many different things that can go wrong physically and mentally. But if it is during the trafficking or even after the trafficking, there is the ability to get that off of their credit, so that that is not an albatross around their necks. And I praise God for that, because that's something that's going to be there when I'm dead and gone.
That's right. That is, Marian, I didn't know about that. You just added to my education on what's going on in this field. And, you know, your life is a testimony.
Amen.
And God has used you in such a tremendous way. So I'm going to end with this. How can we help? We need to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. So if you could, in as few words as possible, because we want to make sure we get this done within the amount of time we have, but how can just the average person, what do they look for? What, if they see something, they certainly should say something, but sometimes people don't understand what they're seeing or hearing. How can we help?
Well, there are two things. The first thing is, if you see a person that does not appear to have their own paperwork, you know, that we take for granted, you know, they don't have their ID, they don't have a license, they don't have their birth certificate, they don't seem to be able to move around freely. Um, there, and this can go for commercial sexual exploitation or labor trafficking. It can be both. If there are, let's say if it's a child in school, you know, if there are vulnerabilities that display themselves, all of the nesses, you know, your homelessness and your poverty, your inability to make sure that, you know, children are eating on a regular basis, to look for, you know, the child abuse. There, a lot of times, a child abuse will manifest itself in familial trafficking, where unfortunately the parents or the aunts or the cousins or uncles, it's not just a sexual abuse, it can actually manifest itself in trafficking. But you look for any vulnerability that is being exploited. Also, with our young people and the LGBTQ community, I know there's more letters after that, but I forget them, but I respect them. Very important to know that many young people are forced into what we call survival sex, because of sometimes their um, sexuality has caused them to be kicked out of the house, and this turns out to be the only thing that they can do. And unfortunately, it's broken my heart over the years that so many of them feel this is the only way they can survive. So you look for vulnerabilities that can be exploited, but one of the things that's very important is to know that in this country there is a movement to fully decriminalize the sex trade, and to make those the predominant people in this country that are impacted by this, and also end up in the criminal justice system, whether it be juvenile detention or jail or prison, are Black and brown people, because they are the ones who are the most vulnerable due to structural violence, poverty, homelessness, lack of education. One thing I always throw out there, I was a convicted felon until, for I think the 12 or 13 of the years that I worked for Sheriff Dart. But because I was hired under Sheriff Sheehan, but Sheriff Dart elevated me. And why? Education. I had an education that, and they really got it. They believed in what they had in terms of rehabilitation, restorative justice. And so that is truly, I just got to throw it out there for any young people or anybody that wants to give an example of the importance of education, even with a felony conviction for so many years, that made the difference for me. But it is truly important to know that some people, and I'm now hearing about this, and I might have mentioned it to you a couple weeks ago, they're thinking about trying to pull this crap in Illinois. And I will definitely want to talk to you more about that soon. But they are truly, they've done it in And I wrote letter to, before the presidential um, uh, elections, I wrote a letter to the then presidential candidates along with Rebecca Bender of RBI, and also they tried it in New York. I went and testified there. I wrote a letter to folks in DC when they tried it there. Now they actually passed a law that actually reduces the ability of law enforcement to do a great deal in California recently. So I'll close with this. We can't let that happen. You need to have partial decriminalization. We call it the equality model. And I can actually send the link, and maybe we can share that with those who watch this. It is extremely important to hold accountable the buyer who has disposable income to purchase a human being, whether it be male, female, adult, child, no matter what their sexual identity may be. But you have to be able to, when that person is ready to exit, make sure that, which is what our model was at the sheriff's office and still is, to provide victim-centered services to those who are being exploited, providing them that way out. We call it exit services and resources. But you also need to educate buyers to the harm that they are doing. In addition to that, we have to provide law enforcement the ability to increase their capacity to do these types of sting operations. We have to make sure that they are technologically savvy and have the ability to stay ahead, not neck and neck, but stay ahead of the bad actors who are also using technology. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody today. And if there's any follow-up questions, let me know.
Dr. Marian Hatcher, thank you so very much for being with us today to share your amazing story. And this is not the end, because I know as long as you have breath in your body that you're going to continue this great work. So with that, we're going to end this interview with you, but I'm hopeful that you'll keep me abreast of what's happening in as far as human trafficking. Any other new bills that are coming up at the federal level. I try to keep my ear to the ground on the state level, but thank you so very much, and may God continue to bless you. Your steps are truly ordered.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we're back. Now, do you know somebody who needs help, or somebody who's being forced to have sex for money or something of value against his or her will? Or if they're under 18, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888, or you can text HELP or info to 233-733 to access help and services. I want to thank all of you for listening and taking the time to broaden your horizons, and absolutely thank our guest today and interviewee for speaking with us and giving us valuable insight to her life and her work. Now, we have a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to hear from our audience here to see what your thoughts, to see if you have any comments or questions. And it's my understanding we have Marian here, so she is open to hear from you. Okay.
I think that it was, for me, it was like eye-opening. Like you see it, you hear it on TV, but it was more profound to hear from someone who actually experienced it. And in my head, I just want to be like gung-ho on what can we do to help prevent it in the future? Do we have talks with youth in schools, or what can we do to be supportive?
Hi, this is Marian. Thank you so much for that comment. One of the most important things that we can do to have a paradigm shift in this area is absolutely that. I've spoken at dozens and dozens of schools, and actually been gone to Whitney Young multiple times at partnership with them, that developed with their, I can't remember the name of the class, but it was amazing how many young people actually want you to tell them more. And young men have come up to me and shared information about how their um, friends were, their introduction to intimacy was perverted through pornography, and what they thought about this whole subject was perverted through pornography. So the best thing that we can do is to have the correct curriculums as early as possible in the formative years in an educational setting.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
I just wanted to thank her for sharing her life's journey. It was very informative, and she bring light to the scripture that many are the afflictions of the righteous, but God delivers them from them all. And I just want her to know how she inspired me to just watch and to be more cognizant of the environment and the people in my environment to ensure that they're not being harmed. Thank you for sharing your testimony.
Thank you.
Comments, questions,
I have one.
observations?
I have one. And I think it's so important. And I too appreciate Dr. Hatcher for sharing her story. And the biggest thing and always the takeaway in situations like this is that it's people that look just like us. I mean, there's no look, for violence and things like that, and crimes against women. And so I think that should be the takeaway, that even if someone hasn't come out and they don't show the signs that you think you're looking for, these things are going on. And so once again, be kind to people and just pay attention.
Amen.
That's my ad for that one.
Thank you, Dana. Anyone else have anything to share? Questions, comments?
Yes, I have a comment. This is Frank Herrera, and I just wanted to first and foremost thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It was truly eye-opening, and I think everyone learned more than a thing or two on human trafficking and how we can help. And I just wanted to pass a message along. My mother worked for the sheriff's office before retiring, Alexis Herrera, and when I told her that you would be speaking
Oh my
for us
goodness,
today,
really? That's your
yes,
mom?
yes, ma'am. And I told her that you'd be speaking in front of us today, and she said, "Wow!" In all my time at the sheriff's office, if anyone knew what they were doing, it was Miss Hackett. So she just
That
wanted
is
me to
so
pass
awesome.
the message along, and it's a wonderful small world. But thank you so
Thank
much for sharing
you.
with us.
Please tell her hello. That's so cool.
Absolutely.
I have a comment. This is Travis Richardson. Back when I was in private practice representing wards of the state for DCFS, oftentimes the young female wards had gotten caught up in the trafficking business. And 201 Backpage was the notorious vehicle that their pimps utilized in order to obtain business. And this was some years ago. So Backpage was very, very busy. I remember because I hadn't heard of it until I started representing the wards. And it was incredible that just about every ward we get that was involved with it, the vehicle was Backpage. So I don't know if Backpage was giving frequent flyer discounts or what, but when the sheriff started focusing on it, that's when you started to see some of that go down, because they had to find another vehicle, because Backpage was just open and notorious with what they were doing.
Yes,
So,
it was quite a privilege to be a part of a sheriff's mechanism to first address Craigslist, and then when Backpage became my biggest monster in the room, to be a part of the effort to bring it down. And so thank you for that comment. You know, we obviously did a great deal. We had a great deal of work that we did with wards of the state, and group homes were an unfortunate hunting ground for these folks as well, for these traffickers. So that's an excellent point of view. Thank you.
Okay, I placed something in the chat. Margaret Mead, a quote from her that says, "Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has." So we all can make a difference in this world. We need to plug in and focus and help somebody else. You know, there are people who are having a tough time, and especially these days. So with that, unless somebody else has something they'd like to share, I'm going to end this lunch and learn. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, comm staff, for all of your help, Johnny Diggs for all of your help, and all of my Rotarian friends, thank you for tuning in. This presentation, Val Talley was very, very much interested in making sure that we got this done during the month of January, since it was the Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So with that, I bid you all a good rest of the day. And again, thank you very much for joining us.